So what I wanted to do tonight was I've got several different topics. I think there's only 6 slides. What I wanted to do was bring those slides up and let's talk about what we see there for a topic. I want to get some information from you guys. Y'all are my SWIC actually asked some questions, and I told her that what we would do would be to ask the brain trust. And you guys showed up, and therefore you are now deputized as the brain trust. And if there's things that we uncover here that look to be worthwhile, I can take them to the AUXCOMM committee that SafeCom has, and we can run those up the flagpole. And my goal is to make AUXCOMM a true asset for the nation. And if we can do that, make our curriculum relevant and worthwhile, then I think we'll have gone a pretty good step toward that. Next slide, please, sir. So there we go. Thank you. This is one of the things that she was curious about more than anything else. We just had a big seminar here in Arkansas about EMAC. And one of the things that EMAC does is pay salaries of the people that would be sent. An EMAC, for those that don't know, is Emergency Management Assistance Compact. It's can be between states, between communities, inside states. And what the deal is there is, for instance, if I had a team here of bulldozer operators that I wanted to send to Colorado to help fight a fire, and I had gone through all the hoops that you have to jump through, then Colorado could tell Arkansas, we need JM's crew, and then we would travel to Colorado, and the state of Colorado would pay our expenses and our operators and everything else that goes on through that EMAC process. Now, as we know, ham radio operators cannot be paid for operating. And what I'd like for the crowd to tell me, and just shortly, just short answers kind of thing, is that a deterrent? If you were involved in a team and you weren't going to be paid, now we're thinking all your expenses would be taken care of, but would you go anyway? And could you say that you were a radio installer and be paid for that, and then operated as an incidental? So I want to open that up to the crowd. And Dan, this is going to be pretty labor intensive on you, I guess, that you're going to get to pick who talks first and what. So go.
I'll talk first. Yeah, I would go probably. If expenses were paid, and which includes, how shall we say, consumables. I've been through the AUXCOMM and the CommT and the RADO. So, yeah, I'm not, the real problem is getting actual time and things up here in the boonies to actually get credentialed. But I would probably go, as long as, it wasn't costing me a lot out of pocket. And when you go to the AUXCOMM, they say you may or may not operate a ham radio. You may be, the CommT might say, hey, help me fix this cable. So if they wanted to pay me, I'd have no problem with that, unless the only thing I was doing was operating a ham radio.
Okay, I might ask if you got a camera when you come on, please show the video. Go ahead, JM.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's right now the AUXC is not defined in the GSA pay schedule, and so that's a difficulty. That's a difficult thing. And I will acknowledge that if you go as a RADO and you are not operating ham radio, you're doing something on public safety frequencies, that's an entirely different story. But if we're using, for instance, ham radio to send WinLink messages, and that's your assignment, then in fact you can't be paid for that. So this is all good information, and that this is the kind of conversation I'm looking to have. So who's next?
Okay, Bill, go ahead. Bill in Idaho.
Yeah, yes, I'll reiterate saying what's already been said. If you're going to pay like my gas, in other words, you want me to go down to Salt Lake or something like that, at $5 a gallon. Yeah, pay my gas. I'll be happy. I'll work your radios. I'll call. I'll WinLink. I'll do that. Same thing. Throw me a donut or two or a cup of coffee, and I'm happy. But yeah, especially the gas is about the only thing that I would say help me out on. But you don't have to pay me my time. I'm a volunteer. I'm more than happy to do it.
Okay. Who's next?
Bruce, did I just forget to lower your hand, or did you put your hand back up?
I think someone popped me and lowered it, but that's okay. I'm on a limited bandwidth connection. That's why I don't do video. Otherwise, it's going to be choppy. The qualifying questions, I think, need to be listed up front, and the qualified questions with the answers more specifically. So one qualifying question would be, are you able to take time off work? Because maybe you're actually employed, not retired, and you need that source of revenue or income to go out and be able to substantiate what you do in real life. So is it a paid thing or not a paid thing? I'm blessed to a degree in that my employer will cover my cost, in certain circumstances, if we get deployed to places, and we're actually on standby potentially for Hawaii, by the way, they will actually pay my salary while I'm on an event or on a field trip. Be polite about how we say this. But the other questions are, other than your out-of-pocket stuff, folks are going to need to know whether or not they've got insurance coverage. If they get injured while on the job, even if it's volunteer, much like a DSW or a DSW worker would have concerns about, who's going to pick up that tab? And last but not least, if you're taking your gear with you on safari, wherever you happen to be landing, and you break your gear, are you going to go out and take care of that yourself, or is someone else going to help you fix that, sponsor fixing it, or taking care of other expenses related? So to me, it's always been a question of more than just what the out-of-pocket and the inconvenience might be, or potentially arrives, to some dollar level of. It's more than just gas money. It's, am I going to get fixed if I get injured? Is my gear going to get replaced or repaired if it gets broken? And if I'm an employed person and I'm not quite retired yet, am I going to be able to go out and afford doing it anyway by taking time off? So those are other things that I think need to be factored into that qualification summary. It's not just a can't be paid. It's like being paid is one thing. Maybe the words and the terminology being reimbursed for other things is another way to look at it. That's what I had.
Okay, and those are good points. We just watched a EMAC seminar today, and one of the things that they talk about is if you're intending on being a provider, then you would have to work through all that stuff with your sending agency, which is going to be your emergency management agency for the state. And one of the things that they let you know is that the receiving agency, which is the other state, has to provide insurance on you. You are essentially an unpaid employee of whoever it is that you're going to help. And so well, unless you're somebody that can be paid, a radio can be paid, a ham radio operator can't. And that was my question, is if we differentiate the two, if all you were going to do was go be an operator, ham operator, would you still go? And what I'm hearing is, so far, yes, I would go if I'm financially able to go. The one of the issues with that is the people that are able to go are retired, and those retired guys may not be physically capable of being gone for a while, and that's another issue altogether. And so that's another issue that we'll talk about in some other time, I'd think. Who's next?
Okay, Scott, go ahead and take it.
Well, thanks, JM, for being here, and good topic, a topic that really needs to be discussed. I think per diem, I know the government's got a per diem rate for every, under the GSA, under the military schedule, they've got a per diem rate for everywhere and on CONUS and off CONUS. So you could work off the per diem rate. The other issue is, like the gentleman stated, I believe it was Bruce. It's easy for people who are retired to go somewhere like you just stated. So I deploy with the federal government under HHS as a comms person, and we have USERRA protection, which allows us to keep our jobs basically when we leave, and we can come back to our jobs. And it's been very helpful for me because I spent 10 weeks in Puerto Rico and my employer was like, can't touch you, have fun, see you when you get back. And it went well because I had my position holding for me. So those are some good things to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Who's next?
Tom? Tom?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, a while ago now, there was something out of the FCC that said certain kinds of employees could use amateur radio without violating a rule. And I don't know if it was an amendment to the rule or how they did it. They used the example of a hospital employee who needs to use the amateur radio to keep the hospital in touch, either through the event or because the amateur radio people can't reach the hospital. And if somebody who's up on that rules and regulations stuff could at some point clear that up for us, that might be very helpful. It could be
I can tell you about that. That's called an incidental operator. In other words,
Okay.
that's not his job. He's just doing it on the side kind of thing. And that's close enough for some things, but this is sure enough outside. I've been thinking about petitioning the FCC that if we could say that somebody was deployed, that the rules didn't apply to them about the being paid thing. So that's kind of sort of what I'm trying to learn from you guys. Is that a critical thing? Is it a deterrent if you're not being paid? So far, unless you're employed, it's not. So who's next?
Okay, Dan, go ahead in California.
Well, I'm gonna spool back a little bit, and you mentioned if an amateur radio operator with AUXCOMM training. First of all, I don't know the details of EMAX hardly at all, but would that accommodate even insurance and per diem and expenses if they drive their own POV, et cetera? Because that influences how the rest of this is going to have to work out. And if the question is, would you as a volunteer be deterred? You shouldn't be a volunteer if something like that would deter you. But the bigger question is, as the cadre of really functional AUXCOMM and similar trained volunteers who are employed, a whole lot's going to depend on their employer's attitude about this. And I know how it works in a federal situation between agencies, but between federal and state or state and county, and we never had to deal with EMAX because there were side deals between the agencies. So if I went someplace to do something I didn't normally do on behalf of another agency, it was just called a detail and covered under other duties as assigned. But what this is talking about has implications. And I guess it's good that SAFECOM has a committee to make recommendations, because I doubt that either AUXCOMM or EMAX, matured with this in mind. So
Well,
Good
that's
question.
exactly right.
Um,
We're one of the things that I learned today in this, and what I'm gonna, if you guys think that there's a value in this, I'm gonna see if I can get that presentation delivered to us here on RATPAC. I think that that would be a sure enough learning experience for all of us, because we are just absolutely not exposed to that kind of thing. If you don't work for an emergency management agency, you don't know about it.
It's a logistics specialty dealing with EMAX for the most part. But
That's
it's
exactly right.
valuable for what RATPAC is trying to do. So yeah, right on.
So one of the things that they talked about in that is when we're making what's called a mission ready package, one of the things that you do is say it's going to cost this much for us to show up, kind of thing. And so that in that case, when you plan to go somewhere, you think you're going to stay in a camp. Well, there'd be no cost to that because the receiving agency is paying for that kind of thing. But what if it takes you 2 days to get there and you have to spend the night in a hotel? Excuse me. And so you go back to your sending state and you renegotiate that kind of stuff, and they have to agree. The receiving state has to agree that they would pay for those costs. And so all this stuff is generally then worked out ahead of time, and everybody, so that there's no surprises. And the reason that they do that is because the receiving state has to understand what it's going to cost them, especially if they don't have a Stafford Act declaration. So that makes sense to me. And so David said he'd like to see the labor rates and what have you. That is not published yet. So that's one of the things that I know that has to be worked on. So there you go.
Well, and I didn't wind far enough back. You talked about using amateur radio frequencies. But what about being a WinLink operator for a share station?
Well, now a share station is an entirely different issue. Those guys can be paid. That you can be paid to talk, or you can be paid to operate WinLink, because those things are those frequencies are available to the agencies themselves. So those services are. So I think that nobody could complain as shares operator being just another reason for everybody to get shares licenses, right?
Looking that way.
There you go. Who's next?
Okay, I'm gonna bring up Fred. You might take a look at the chat here. Some stuff out there, but go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. I'm having trouble with camera, so I'll have to do without the video. That's a blessing, believe me, for you. Yeah. I think it might be helpful if you broke this down a little bit, the scope of this. Are you talking about local deployment within your county and your local emergency management? Or are you talking about a deployment to another authority having jurisdiction outside of the county? Those are, I think, different situations, and something to differentiate what you're trying to do. For us here,
go ahead, Fred. I'm sorry.
For us here in middle of North Carolina, we're volunteers. We don't get paid. We don't have insurance. And why do we do it? Well, it's a way of giving back. Now, the state has a database called Terms, which keeps track of our credentials and our training. And there we also identify if we're available for deployment to another AHJ. And so that's kind of a precursor to the setup. Now, if we are requested by another AHJ, there would be a memorandum of understanding between the two entities, between my local county and wherever I might be going. And at that time, I'd also have the opportunity to say, no, I'm not going, or yeah, I'll be there. And so it's going to depend on a whole lot of factors, and probably compensation is not at the top of the list. So it depends. It all gets back to it depends. And so I think it would be helpful if you get it back to a narrow scale.
Okay. Yeah,
So I'm with you on that. EMAC is agreement between states. It's not between counties, for instance, kind of thing. What we're talking about specifically was EMAC stuff, but we can talk about between neighboring AHJs, but that's not a EMAC thing. And I agree that that's all something that really because we're just moving into this AUXCOMM stuff in a big way. It's beginning to snowball. This is the kind of thing that FEMA will be typing sooner or later, AUXCOMM teams, for lack of a better word, strike teams or task forces or whatever they're going to call them. And at that point, we will be, people are going to have to know what they're doing ahead of time. And so now's the time to just start thinking about it. That's all I've got to say about that. Who's next?
Okay, Tom, you got your hand up again.
Yes, sir. Wanted to point out that when I go as a volunteer, which has already happened to me several times, and I can afford it, which because of the way I worked, I often could. I made sure my hours got to the accounting office for the particular event, because my hours could be added in as local contribution. For instance, when I went as a firefighter, if I was a volunteer, the local contribution was the same as my level of firefighter gets paid in Montgomery County, even though I wasn't still in the county because I was from Montgomery County Fire and Rescue. And when I turned in that sheet for all the people we had with us, I thought that lady that was running the numbers there was going to kiss me on the mouth. She was so grateful to see income rather than outgo, for whatever that's worth.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we certainly preach here in Arkansas whenever there's a tornado or anything like that, that's going to be a declared disaster that we're going to get some Stafford Act money for. We certainly have all those operators that did Skywarn and the people that are working in relief to write their hours down. And a regular ham radio operator is worth $28 an hour against that cost share. And that's a great benefit. And I don't think enough people take advantage of that. Who's next?
Brad?
Just wanted to jump on that if I may.
Who's that?
It's Fred.
Okay, go ahead.
Port QBZ. Yeah, same situation here. We report our hours. We don't get compensated. The county does by FEMA. And that goes in to an account then that's kind of an attaboy account or a justification as to why EM is supporting us, giving us a space on the tower and electricity and some of the other benefits that come. As AUXCOMM, and our charter is we can't own any equipment. And so it's helpful to have a relationship with the county that can own equipment. And we can justify their expense by the amount of hours that we put in as volunteers. And it does work out. Over.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay,
Idaho Dan, are there a bunch more hands up? I
No.
kind of sort of like to.
can you see chat?
Yeah, I think we pretty well. There's one. Let's see. Doug in Florida says everybody doesn't get shares licenses, and what I meant, Doug, was that the entities need the licenses. That's and so you are correct about that. And the Idaho volunteer hours worth $31.80, and that it depends on where you are. In Arkansas, it's $28. In Idaho, it's $31. Just depends on where you are and what it is. There is a GSA schedule that tells you everybody's worth everywhere. And that's what they've come with. So there you go. ComL's worth a lot of money, by the way. So that's that.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide here.
I have a
Yes.
comment, if you can hear me. But I
Sir.
can't find, this is Gary, K2KYJ, and I don't have a camera, I apologize. A couple of things. I'm in South Carolina. In South Carolina, AUXCOMM people keep a 214 from the time they leave their house until the time that they get back to their house. All of those hours, as was mentioned earlier, are credited to the state in the case of AUXCOMM in South Carolina. We also volunteer in a couple other places. I volunteer at ETV and in a few others. And it's the same thing there. We log all of our hours because they get compensated for our volunteer time. We don't, of course, but they do. So I think it's very critical that people do that. I'm going to comment on the money part. My position, and I can only talk on my position, is that I feel that I'm volunteering. I don't expect compensation, and I don't expect that anybody's going to cover any of my expenses. I'm certainly not going to be upset if they do, but that's not part of the game. My feeling is the other gentleman that said, I do it because I want to, and I want to help. So I think those are a very big part of the amateur community to me. And I will also throw in, there's a lot of comments about shares. I am the Southeastern Regional Coordinator for shares. And I would like to point out, if you become a shares member, you're also very much expected to participate. So there's a lot more than just applying for a shares license. You're expected to show up for working group meetings once a month. You're expected to show up for nets, and we have them every week. So, you know, it's a lot like Mars. There's more to it than just, I'm going to send in a Form 1 and I'm going to get a license. And I will say, and this is a Gary Leonard comment, I'm very prone towards agency Mars members versus auxiliary Mars members. I'm sorry, I'm saying Mars, shares members. And I'm saying that because if you are part of an agency, that means that you're already involved and they know who you are, and you are going to be someone hopefully that will be trusted to handle messages and be responsive and not make a bad name for both shares and amateur radio people. So I think that those are all important things, and that's my comment for the moment.
Okay, that's real good. I like that. I like the idea of that 214. That may be something that we need to commence into fairly early, adding into our curriculum, that they want to keep track of that stuff no matter what, because those documented hours can be utilized in more than one fashion. Now, Steve has in chat, Steve Waterman has said that he needs to tell us something. So, Steve, please.
Well, good evening, everybody. I want to just second what Gary Leonard has said, and that is there are two separate issues with the Mars auxiliary versus a Mars member that is a member through an authority having jurisdiction or a specific critical infrastructure partner. Those people who are involved with shares as a result of being involved with an agency, their direction comes from the agency. End of story. Okay, not from anywhere else. Those individual members, mostly Mars, who are auxiliary, that is shares, DHS, NCC, National Coordinating Center for Communication, Shared Resources, auxiliary members, and that have no nearby agency that they are associated with, are the agency, are the auxiliary members that Gary's talking about, and their course is totally different. They have a lot more interaction with the shares headquarters, and are really subject to what the shares headquarters have to say, because they do not have any agency sponsorship other than shares. So those two distinctions need to be made, because frankly, I agree with Gary. The value of shares is the value that it has to the stakeholders that keep us all safe. And those are the state and local jurisdictions. Thank you.
Yeah, your point's well taken. So let's move on if we can here. That was all topic one. We burned up 30 minutes on it here. So
Well, that's okay. Steve, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my point is I have deployed from Colorado through EMAC with an incident management team to a hurricane. And my thought is that if you go as an AUXC or a radio, you're going to be in a radio situation where there might be a ham radio in the room, but they're probably going to be using the other NTIA or public safety radios as well. I don't think there'd be a problem saying, well, once in a while use the ham radio, but you're going to be talking on these other radios or using WinLink as well. I don't think there'll be a big problem with, in other words, just because you're an AUXC person doesn't mean you're a ham radio only person.
that's true. Okay.
Or here. Dan, you want to keep it short?
By the way, a quick comment. Just because you're a shares member doesn't mean you're a ham at all. You do not need to be an amateur radio operator to be a shares person.
Exactly.
Okay, Dan, California.
Yeah, first of all, I'm surprised that Steve or Gary didn't pick up on this, but Shares doesn't issue licenses. I think CISA is the licensed agency in charge of the frequencies. Shares issues call signs to agencies, and they can have anybody they want using that call sign so long as they meet their requirements and are duly authorized. And to answer this next topic too, I think what was missing in 2016 AUXCOMM class was a good understanding of the planning P, and that 213s are not optional.
There you go. Okay.
And that's just off the top of my mind.
We do go through over the planning P now. It's not the planning P that if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a planning P that I think is much more succinct and understandable especially if you're not an emergency management planner. So there you go. I found that, and I think I should have put it on a slide, and I didn't think about it. So there you go.
Okay.
Who's next?
Brad, pick her up.
Thank you for that, Fred K and 4QBZ. You asked for three things. The first one would be WinLink. WinLink. That's the one thing that I think AUXCOMM brings that's not very well disseminated across the emergency communications group. And so that's a unique benefit. The other is stick to the script. JM, I would challenge you about your planning P. Stick with the one that's on the wall. You'll get along a lot better.
Oh, mine was a joke, Fred.
Good.
You'll see if you look at it, you'll think that's pretty funny.
Well, my point, I guess, is that some folks do want to get off the reservation, and they've got a better idea how to do it. And that's way outside of NEMS and the ICS and the environment that we do need to work with. The third thing that I think needs to be trained is the use of pro words in messaging. And that becomes important. And with that, I'll hand it back to the net.
Okay. Those are duly noted. And who's next?
There's nobody with their hands up. If we're clear in chat, we can move on to the second topic. Wait a minute, Steve got his hand up. Steve, go ahead. Steve. KI0KY, Colorado.
Yeah, hang on. So now I got unmuted. Okay. I believe that the current AUXCOMM task book does have a WinLink requirement in it, as does the higher level of the Aries task book. So I think that's all. I just wanted to add that. So WinLink is even though most of the, as you know, the AUXCOMM class is how to play in ICS. It's not about how to turn dials and push buttons.
Okay. Victor, you're up. Victor?
Good evening and thank you. I've never taken the MCOM course. One of the reasons I've heard people say, well, I'd had to take my 100, 200, and 700 over again because they were so old. I think one of the questions here is, do any of these prerequisite courses expire? And if they do, I think that should be made more visible or in a question for an AUXCOMM course, that it be, say within the last 3 years or the last 36 months, whatever number they want to choose. Or I took mine in 2018, I believe. It lasts forever? Fine. Yeah, it's just one of those, is it still worth having on that program, or do I have to go back and retake it? Thank you.
Okay, got that. Who's next?
Okay, Daryl. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, okay, mine's just a short one as a reference to WinLink. I think should be stressed is the point-to-point versus going through the internet, the value of having that where the internet is not available in the emergencies. That's my only comment.
Okay, thank you. Doug, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. On the AUXCOMM course, I think North Carolina has probably come up with your best answer on that one. They add another day and they teach everything in the way of state unique equipment and all kinds of other things to everybody finishing their AUXCOMM class. So rather than try to expand the AUXCOMM course to make the student more valuable than AHJ, because everybody's different, I would suggest that the AUXCOMM course be formatted with a half a day or a fourth day to add in state or local unique requirements and leave it at that.
Okay.
This is Gary. Can I comment on that?
Okay, make it quick.
I'll try to make it quick, but I'm not known. I'm like Steve. I don't do short stuff usually. The comment, I think it was Doug that just made the comment about the AUXCOMM. In South Carolina, AUXCOMM is the beginning of a path. And once you go through the AUXCOMM class and you do a few events and some exercises, we start moving you into a COMU position. When you go into the COMU position, you start training with public safety people. The public safety people learn what you do, you learn what they do. And from COMU, you move into COML, where you get more training with the ability to use public safety equipment, if you will. And I think that's a very important move in AUXCOMM. Having worked a lot of hurricanes and other things here in South Carolina on site, it really helps when you're familiar with what your counterparts in public safety are doing and being able to help them when they need it and have them be able to help you when you need it. End of comment.
Roger that.
Right.
Who's next?
We want to go into the second slide. AUXCOMM topic 2.
Oh, that's what we were talking about, Dan. We're good on that.
Okay, we'll go to, whoops, how about 3?
Okay, and this changing gears just a little bit. You know, AUXCOMM is designed to support public safety communications in the communications unit. And so we were curious about, as opposed to ARES, or as opposed to just your amateur club in your community, does your AUXCOMM group support other activities like doing bike races and marathons and that kind of stuff, demonstrations at fairs? What do you do besides that?
It may have changed since 2016, but AUXCOMM is not a group. It's a training course. So
Well,
it's individual jurisdiction.
Okay, let's.
You can have an AUXCOMM group though, Dan, and that's the you know, then they may be different. I mean, in my club here, for instance, there's only a couple of 3 of us that are interested in doing AUXCOMM. Those AUXCOMM people might do something that larger group does not, and vice versa. And so that's what I'm curious about.
Okay, let's just raise our hand, not just jump in. Tom, go ahead.
It was quite a few years ago now, but because we were part of emergency management's work group, and because they had a few things on a card, they sent me as an electrician to hook up some generators for people who had equipment-dependent medical conditions, where it was much better management to defend those patients in place than it would have been to move them to hospitals that had no place to put them once they reached the ED. They'd have clogged up the ED and the whole thing once they got there, because those people need a lot of help when they're not at home on their equipment. So we hooked up generators and stuff by using a simple gimmick. I won't get into details, but the only real problem we had was some of their neighbors seemed to resent that we wouldn't hook them up too. And I told a number of them to get lost, or they were going to be meeting a police officer real soon. Back to you.
Okay, Bruce, you got your hand up?
I do. So at least in my area, which is San Diego, we've got San Diego and Imperial County. The AUXCOMM specific functions are really designed to go out and serve city, county, and then state affiliated agencies. What's interesting though is that they have probably a smaller population than some of the other groups, but we're all sharing a pool of pretty much the same volunteers. ARES has the largest chunk, but we also share that with Red Cross. We share that with some regional CERT. We share that with AUXCOMM. We even share that with REACT here in Southern California. So all of the other agencies that I mentioned, or non-agencies, NGOs rather, do support public safety communications. If anything is actually invoked with AUXCOMM, it is specifically to support the state, the county, and the local city and regional areas. But what's interesting is there's a mix of radio technologies that are in there, and some of that really is very heavily dependent on amateur radio frequencies and gear, not specifically state commercial gear or shares or anything like that. So that's where there's kind of an interesting blend, is that AUXCOMM will interact with RACES, with ARES, with REACT, with CERT, et cetera, with Red Cross, but cross-functionally via the amateur radio gear equipment and frequencies, but they don't specifically support direct public safety communications as was mentioned.
Okay, cross-pollination.
Okay, Fred, you got your hand up again?
Yeah, I'm back. One of the things I learned early was 3-2-1. 3 parts service, 2 parts fun, and one part stuff, bureaucracy. And if you keep that balance, then I think you'll have a very healthy organization. My last job, I was the head of corporate research, administration, and planning. If you work out that acronym, I was the head of CRAP in a 1,000-person research organization with $1 billion budget. And my job was to keep the crap out of the labs. And I take that same feeling into every organization I'm a part of. Keep the stuff away from people so they can learn to do their job and actually have fun doing it. Over.
Roger that.
Okay. Victor's got his hand up again.
Thank you. Everett, City of Everett and Snohomish County ACS groups. We have a number of members that have the AUXCOMM training. And yes, we do a lot of activities. We do marathons, we do bike rides, we've done parades and Fifth Saturday exercises. So while we're not directly interfacing with the public safety communications community, it's the idea that new operators may not be that familiar or that comfortable being on the air. And every exercise that we do gives them that understanding that, hey, I can talk to anybody anywhere. And that's the benefit of the whole program. So thank you.
Okay.
Hey, how are we doing in chat there, JM?
I think that Ruben asked a question and Jed replied to him, so I think that we're good. The answer, Ruben, is yes. The WinLink will work without internet. It will work without the grid. As long as your radios and computers are powered, you can send a message to somebody. So, Dan, if there's no more hands up, I think we're ready to go to the next slide.
There we go.
All right, we kind of touched on this a little bit ago. And so given you guys that have taken a AUXCOMM class lately, what additions in the task book should be made? Because we'll have to design exercises to be able to fulfill those tasks for the persons. And the state specific communications, that's very well received. That can't be done for the national task book, but if the state is willing to do it, then I think that's something that we would do. That's something we do in Arkansas, for instance. But that requires the state to, or the AHJ, to build their own task book. And that would have to be, to be deployable then at a state level, the state would have to agree to that task book. So you could always add to, you couldn't take away from. So who's, let me look at the chat here, Dan.
Okay, there's no hands up.
No hands up. Okay, so Mr. Harris says state-specific communications assets, and that's very well done. WinLink proficiency is for sure. George had to leave, and Ruben wants to know where you can get black and white information that this is possible. Any link, you can go to the winlink.org website and learn about them, and that's a good deal. Charles says add other digimodes besides WL2K like FLDigi and Packet, and that's well received, and we will look at that as well. And that is
Fred's got his hand up when you're ready.
Fred, I'm here ready. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned WinLink several times, but actually we went through a 10 session training class. WinLink has a whole lot of functionalities that most people are not aware of. Do you know how to send a photograph? Do you know how to send a radiogram? Do you know how to do P2P? These are all elements of WinLink, and just setting a 213, that's basic. And so it's exploding the rest of the functionalities. It's an incredible tool. Over.
Absolutely. The forms function in the thing is a huge deal, and it is one of the, I just can't believe how useful it is, and it flabbergasts me every time I look at it and somebody asks a question. I said, well, WinLink will solve your problem there, and we go through that in happy days. All good to go. Who's next?
All right, no hands are up right now. If chat is clear, I'm just looking here. It looks like it's clear to me. Does it to you?
So Bill says, isn't the purpose of AUXCOMM to finally provide a NIMS typing to hams? And that's going to help FEMA to understand that AUXCOMM has to be typed, or that ham radio, that AUXCOMM rather, not just ham radio, has to be typed. And that's going to be a challenge that for those guys to work with that. I don't know. I'm hoping to be able to affect that a little bit here. And Doug says changes to the position task book have to be coordinated and agreed by the SWICs. And that's pretty close to exactly right. The feds actually have the capability and the responsibility to develop the position task book that we deliver as an AUXCOMM instructor. The states can add to that position task book, but they're not allowed to take away from. And so I promise that the SWICs weigh in heavily whenever we talk about position task books, for sure. I know that. Who's next? Anybody else? That's all in chat.
Steve put a document in there. I invite everybody to go in the chat and view or download that document. It has a lot of different programs coming out for WinLink with all the updates that's been going on. It's a document well worth looking at.
Oh, yeah, I cannot stress highly enough that people that are interested in progressing, watch those programs. We're going to see some amazing stuff that these guys have figured out and thought up. I don't know how they think of it. They must stay awake at night doing it, Dan. I don't know how they, what they can do. Does anybody else want to comment on this topic?
I'd like to make a comment. And by the way, my little icon to put my hand up seems to have disappeared. So I apologize for butting in. Again, in South Carolina, I'm going to bring up 2 points. WinLink to us, as Steve will verify to you, is extremely important. All of our flyaway kits, all of our trailers, all of our available emergency operation centers have WinLink, and we use it extensively, and we train with it extensively. So I can't recommend WinLink strong enough. I think it's probably the single most important tool we have available. I'm not very keen on HF voice as far as getting traffic across. It sure is a lot easier with WinLink. And I think being trained in using it radio to radio, using it going to RMSs that are well outside of your area of hazard are all very, very important. Going back to AUXCOMM, the one thing I haven't heard today, which I think is very, very key for AUXCOMM. Again, I have to speak for South Carolina because it's North Carolina and South Carolina are the only two places that I'm personally familiar with. One of the things that AUXCOMM does, it gives us a way of giving a certification, if you will, or or a badge of merit. When we want to send somebody to an agency to do a job, they want to know what that person can do. They want to know what that person is like. And part of number one, getting into AUXCOMM in South Carolina has to do with your peers looking at you and seeing how do you work with the management? How are you going to work with the COML, or how are you going to work with the people at the operations center? Are you going to sweep the floor? If they tell you to sweep the floor, you're going to tell them, I'm a ham radio operator, I'm not doing that. So we look at that. We want to be able to tell the person that we're sending a AUXCOMM person to, hey, this person has been tested and we know that they're going to be able to help you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest points of talking about AUXCOMM. We're teaching, or not so much creating a club or a group. We're trying to certify somebody and say they're qualified before we send them out in the field and make them do something. End of comment.
I absolutely agree with that.
Are you ready to move on to the?
Yeah, let's go right ahead. So this is another one of the questions that my SWIC asked was, what innovations have you made in your AHJ or in your team that would be useful in other jurisdictions? There are places that are just starting, and if they can learn from your best practices, I think that is a very useful thing. And so that's one of the programs that we're working on starting, is people saying, we're doing this and it's been very successful, and make a repository of that. I think that's a positive thing. So who's got an innovation that you don't believe anybody else is doing, or that you think somebody else could learn from? Or are we all doing the same thing?
Tom's got his hand up anytime you're ready.
I'm
Okay,
ready.
so one of the things we did here was that one of the projects which was executed by the National Institute of Health, the National Library of Medicine, which had a disaster unit, and they had a piece of software made that allowed anybody that you were serving to write an email, because the software wouldn't allow them to do it wrong. You wrote it with a browser, and the software prevented the person trying to make the message from, say, trying to use their normal email background, which they specially set up to look like a piece of note paper and has to be sent as an image. The software didn't allow any of that nonsense. And also, you couldn't attach some big anything without the software telling you, please contact the control operator and here's how to do it, so that people couldn't gum up the works by not knowing things. Now that software became obsolete because WinLink changed the way they managed the messages. And I suppose that's inevitable, but there is one thing I'd like to ask somebody in WinLink to look at. Is Steve still on here? The WinLink packet program provides a POP3 server for email. And if there was a way to do that, to provide a POP3 server that would also help the writer stay on their glide path and on their center line, that would be a very good thing. That's it.
POP3 or iMac?
It's POP3. At least that's what it says on the program.
Okay, Doug, you got your hand up?
Yeah, you're talking about innovations. There's a couple things that folks need to start getting at least an understanding. You don't have to be an expert yet, I don't think, but one is ALE, and preferably 2G ALE, because that's the baseline commonality amongst all of the systems right now. So that's one. Ion 2G is out, and I've got to give Devin a lot of credit. He's done a great programming job for those of you that are familiar with it. That's going to get used more, I think, as agencies develop. As you get into those of that are dealing with shares programs, shares operates on a bunch of frequencies, and generally it's a broadband capability for antennas. So anyway, ALE is one. The other one is probably digital voice. 3DB is seems to be developing well, and it's another capability, another tool. There are a massive amount of messaging programs out there right now. I mean, you got JS8 call, you got several others. One of the problems we've got is it's hard for everybody to know everything about all of them. FL Digi does a lot of things for a lot of people. But again, try to keep you don't have to be an expert in everything, but try to understand what's out there and what's coming, because you may, at least as an AUXC, you can be put in a position to say, hey, can you make this work? And you may have to call 2 or 3 people, but you may be expected to try to make it work. That's all I got, Dan. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, Steve, can you turn your camera on and come on, please?
I think so. Yeah, I just want to make a statement about ALE. ALE's in voice is used to determine a frequency, just like the heuristics are in WinLink. And because Mother Nature is on the way to making multiple frequencies for a given distance available with good quality index and good readability, the need for both is becoming less and less. So, for example, if I wanted to send a message to Doug Lynch, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's, I don't care, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I look on the available frequencies on shares, which are over 103. I look at those frequencies. I have multiple choices with the same quality index. And anybody that uses WinLink Express on HF can look at the forecast and see what I'm talking about for any period of time. I can look on there and I can see that I have 4 or 5 frequency options, or 2 or 3 frequency options, or at least 2 frequency options most of the time, so that if one is occupied or there's a megawatt broadcast station for some reason nearby, I can always move to other frequencies. As we get older and older, and that 11-year cycle starts on the downtrend, we'll find that ALE, and the way WinLink does it as well, will become more and more valuable, because you don't have the options that you have now and for the next several years. That doesn't only apply to WinLink, of course, that applies to everything. So that's something that we cannot overlook. And it may take a little time to talk about it, but it's extremely important to know that when you get, when you've asked to send a message and you can't find anybody to take that message and put it through the internet. Thank you.
Dan, I got one more thing to add to what Steve said. That is a great way to cheat the system. And I do what Steve said. I'll go look at the WinLink frequency channel selection tables. When somebody says, what can we get for a good video, a good voice frequency? And you can start with a couple of those suggestions, and you're usually going to come out better than guessing on your own. I'm no propagation specialist at all.
Good advice. Go ahead, JM.
Well, no, those were good suggestions here, and I'll take both their comments to heart. So who's next?
No hand. How we doing in chat?
That was the end of that here. So let's go on here. So how are your local and state programs funded? Here in Arkansas, it's because we just don't have a line item for that. What we get is club funded stuff and training, by the way. Some people pay for stuff out of their pocket, and or maybe we get some leftover money from out of a budget. I myself have purchased several items that are in use at the Arkansas Division of Emergency Management for the state station there. And I'm just curious, is that the same way it is everywhere else, or what? And what I'm looking for, fellas, is some ammunition to tell the bean counters at the state that I need a sure enough line item that says training, equipment, and maintenance.
Your word is law over there. You don't need anything.
Okay, let's stop this, the jumping in here. Steve, you got your hand up.
Yes, Colorado, they passed a law that says that there will be an AUXCOMM unit as part of the Department of Security and Homeland Security Emergency Management, and it will have money each year as part. And the original legislation had so much per year, so that's an unusual way to do it. But it is in state law. There will be an AUXCOMM unit, and it will be funded each year.
And we are envious of Colorado for that, by the way.
Okay, Bill, Idaho.
Let me unmute here. Yeah, I think some of you guys already know our problem here in Oneida County, that we're about to get kicked off the mountain, along with the intertie, and that's because the governments just don't care. And we now have a sheriff who is absolutely guaranteed. I mean, he has stated it clearly that amateur radio has no purpose in emergency services whatsoever. It's an outdated technology, and it can just be kicked off. So I don't know how. I mean, I got a big presentation coming up, but I can tell you that at least in my neck of the woods here in Idaho, we have a hard way to go. And I'm pretty sure most of the southeast part of the state is the same way. They don't care. I mean, and they don't see it as being valuable at all.
How's that presentation coming along? I've sent some resources for you, Steve.
I really appreciate it, JM. You and Dan have sent me a bunch of stuff that, and as you said, they're not really going to care about how great the art is and how much fun it is. They need to know things like, $31 an hour. And if we have, the 12 hardcore members that we have are working a problem, that's $31 an hour the county doesn't have to come up with. In a county that has 5,000 people in it, that's a lot of money. If we spend 3 or 4 days doing, an exercise, and they didn't have to, and they had to pay $31 an hour, they'd be in a lot of hurt, And here's the thing, they'll get the $31 back and never have to pay us. So that's the stuff I need to start to bring forward to them, that what we're capable of doing, and see how that plays out. But, I think it's uneven. I think there's some jurisdictions in this country that understand the value of amateur radio, and there are others that they just think that's a great World War II thing, wasn't it? So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. Well, go back to Don and Steve both. They've got some good ideas. I think they've been going your way on that.
Right.
Okay, Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
In answer to the question, I always thought that an AUXCOMM money would come through the EMA the AUXCOMM unit was associated with. And now I'm getting an inkling that it's not that way in a lot of places, and it's a big surprise to me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, Bill, you're not the only one that has that problem. My agency believes that the cell phone is the savior of the planet. And we've had to go out and purchase a lot of our own equipment. I've gone out and purchased equipment, just on the WinLink side to show them, hey, this is a viable option. And trying to get equipment, and we're starting to make some inroads. But like I said, we've got people who seem to think that cell phones will always work, and we don't need to worry about amateur radio because it's a hobby for a bunch of old guys. That's kind of what I've heard, and it's a challenge.
Well, you got some disasters going on right now that might give an answer to that question. Okay. Bill in Washington, you got your hand up?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. Interesting conversation. My viewpoint is amateur radio frequencies, amateur radio in general, the one that Steve likes, I can't remember the name of it. Those are tools. The real resource is us, the trained operator. We take the time to learn the ICS. We take the time to work with our served agencies. We are the resource, and we're the valuable part. I can work with anything, whether it be a fax machine, a public service radio, a telephone, but I know how to communicate. And I know their world, because they don't want, when I say they, I mean the professionals that get paid 8 by 5. They don't want a volunteer coming in that they have to educate. They need somebody that can hit the ground running. At least I have the training with the ICS stuff. They already know me. And if my county recommends me to a different county in Washington, they can say what my training is, and it's a known quantity. And I think that's what I said in the chat. AUXCOMM is at least a way of typing hams, because we haven't, ever since 9/11, we've never been able to type a ham across the country. And I think we just got passed by. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, JM.
I agree with him. It's a matter of we're just now on the beginning this, where it's beginning to be taken seriously, recognized at a federal level, and we have to pay attention to that. That typing is going to be something that I'm really interested in seeing what they do, and I'm hoping that I can affect it, because I'm afraid they're going to try to lowball the ham radio operator when they're talking about his skills. And I'm also afraid that they're going to give more credit to people that are too new to know anything, for lack of a better way to put it. So there you go. Who's next?
I don't see any hands up. If chat's cleared, then we can go to the next slide.
Well, the next slide is we're done. So yeah, they're in the chat here. Tom from Montgomery County says part of our problem is the arrogance of some of our operators that say when all else fails, and we're going to save you. And I agree with that. We've been promoting amateur radio in the wrong fashion for a considerable period of time, and I'm hoping to change that. I'm going to have to change it from the top down, I think, and that's where we're going to. The ARRL is promoting that, not saying that they had any other choices necessarily, but AUXCOMM is not going to do that particular kind of thing. So there you go. And that's what I've got for the evening. I really appreciate all y'all's input. It is a pleasure to talk to you people. It's a real joy to visit with like-minded individuals across the nation. Helps me to realize that I am working in the right direction. And so, Dan, if you don't have anything else.
Oh, Bruce has got his hand up.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you, sir. I'm just thinking about closing comments for the group and some of the dialogues that we've had. AUXCOMM is a really awesome thing, depending on where you live in the US, and to everyone's point, how mature their individual programs are, how well received they are, what they have for interoperability agreements, MOUs, and other things like that. to go out and help out their local areas and their regions. But what I think is often missed when we talk about AUXCOMM is, like I had described earlier regarding San Diego, making sure that we have peer functionality, cross functionality, mixed and hybrid capabilities that can interact between what people would do in an AUXCOMM program under AUXCOMM leadership and still have the interoperability and the other convergence with ARES, RACES, CERT, REACT, Red Cross, all of the other functional agencies that use amateur radio. And the point that I try to make whenever I come into scenarios like, why does AUXCOMM and AUXCOMM folks need to talk to all of the other NGOs? Well, it's because there's a lot more of those people operating in the field and in the wild, whether it's taking care of their own families, their neighborhoods, their local communities. If they don't have a way to go out and have a nice friendly chat with someone in the government or the GO to let them know we need help, we need assistance, we need medical aid, we need XYZ, then AUXCOMM by itself doing AUXCOMM things doesn't really serve the community well, or may not in some cases. So whenever we have the AUXCOMM dialogue, I'm always going to tail end that with, let's make sure that we're also communicating with how we need to peer with the other groups, because there's a lot more folks in those other areas and they're more local to the feet on the ground, their local neighborhoods, their local regions that they're in, than some place where they have an AUXCOMM setup, maybe in the center of a city, or maybe regionally at some part of town. Both need to be supported. And every time I hear the chuckle about cell phones being the savior of the universe, we're always going to go through that. That's like the solar cycle. We're always going to get new leadership and new admins in, some government agency or some local agency. We have that here frequently. About every 5 to 6 years, somebody pops in, looks for budget, and wants to know where all the satellite phones are at. And we kind of chuckle and go, we've got satellite phones and they have their function and their purpose, but we also do these other things. And let's show you how we use these other tools or conveyances to go out and take care of public safety and the community needs. That's not satellite and not cell phone. So we at least try to have that dialogue. Great presentation tonight. Thank you for putting this on. Thank you for all the community feedback as well. It was a good session.
Bruce, one of the things that we like to talk about with those other groups that you mentioned is situational awareness. And that's something that our emergency managers here in Arkansas are very interested in gathering, is situational awareness. We're seriously worried about that. A lot of people's hair is on fire with this coming eclipse because it's going to affect our entire state. The states that the shadow doesn't run across are going to be places where people park, and we've already run out of porta potties. So there's just no end to the use for those other agencies, those other NGOs, the REACT, the CAP, the CERTs, all those people are important. And we're trying to integrate those into a single integrated operational plan is difficult, but we're working on it. Thank you for your comment.
All right, Pete, we'll come in and tie some ribbons on this.
Yeah, I've been trying to find it, but the point about the community, there are a few FEMA Region 2 webinars about AUXCOMM and ham radio, and there's one which I cannot remember the exact title of, which was talking exactly about that. I can't remember what they called it, Community Information Center or something like that. And the whole idea of this thing was that you set up in whatever your neighborhood, in an affected area, a place where people can come and find out what's going on or get messages out or whatever. And maybe they can get, bottled water or whatever. And then those information or those help centers, I guess, if you want to call it, need to have some communications And this wasn't specifically a ham radio presentation. It was, FRS but the real good thing would be maybe that would be a great place to have, to have the ham with somebody back at the central location, whether it's EOC, so that situational awareness in both directions out into the distributed into the community where the sheriff and the emergency management agency and all those, they just don't have enough people to do that. That is, if I could find it real quick, I was going to pop up the link, but I think if you look FEMA Region 2 webinars and maybe use search on radio, I wish I could find it and pop it in here before we get done, but I haven't so far.
Well, and you may be talking about CERT, Civil Emergency Response Teams. And there's a few comments in chat about rumors and all that kind of stuff. And you're exactly right. There's all kinds of things that happen. And that was one of the questions that I've been asked is how will we know that a message coming into the EOC is correct? And how do we know that who says they sent it from, they really did? And I told them we're just going to have to take it with a grain of salt. We're going to have to try to verify through other means that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so that's where we are with that. But I think that the AUXCOMM program is seriously useful and maybe one of the best things that the federal government's done in a long time toward integrating this very huge resource that we have here of radio type volunteer people. So there you go. Dan?
Okay. Well, sir, with your blessing, we'll start wrapping this up and say 73s to everybody.
I want to say something real quick that just caught my attention, please.
Go ahead.
A question of certain information being distributed. The way it's supposed to work in the city of Everett is that the PIO is supposed to be making the official announcements, or somebody out of the fire department PIO. So I think the question here for MCOM is, are we including those individuals in those trainings to make sure that they understand and we understand what the two-way street looks like or the one-way street looks like? Thank you. Good night. Have a great week.
Thank you, Victor. All right, with that, I'm going to say 73s to all. See you guys next week.